Cool. So it is 11 o'clock. So thank you everybody for joining us for Skype a Scientist Live. Today is going to be a jam-packed day full of a lot of environmental topics. So we're starting with plastic pollution. As a marine scientist who works in Hawaii, good Lord, is this relevant to what we do? Because it's just, there's plastic everywhere on the beaches and it's really a bummer. So I've been pretty excited about this session. Generally speaking, we are a nonprofit and we totally rely on users for donor support. And so if you can support our program, that would really be the difference between us being able to function and not. So if you can do that at patreon.com/SkypeAScientist or paypal.me/SkypeAScientist. We are a 501c3, so all of your donations are tax deductible. As a heads up, at noon, we're going to be talking about climate change. At 3:30, this is all in Eastern time in the US. 3:30, we're talking about biodiversity, specifically on islands. And then at 4:30, we're going to be hearing from the Earth Day Network folks all about what they do and ways that we can contribute on Earth Day, even when we are regrettably stuck inside. I think that's all the information I have that's necessary right now. So Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Anna Walsh, and I'm currently doing my doctoral work in environmental chemistry at MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Cape Cod. Before this, I did my undergraduate degree in environmental health at Northeastern University, and then a master's in environmental engineering at Yale, focusing on air pollution. And all of that is just to say that I come to the table with a fairly broad background that includes everything from public health to organic chemistry. My current work examines how sunlight degrades plastic in the ocean with the aim of gaining a better understanding of how plastic formulations control its fate and impacts in the environment. And recently, my group put out a pretty exciting paper. I mean, I'm very excited about it, showing that sunlight degrades polystyrene, one of the most common consumer plastics, in decades, which is quite different than the initial estimate of thousands of years based on microbial degradation. And through all of this, we've been working closely with industry and lawmakers to incorporate our findings into better policies and products that minimize the negative impacts of plastic pollution, because I think it's critical to connect this science with cutting edge science to actual policy and the real world.
So polystyrene, that is just like styrofoam, right?
Yeah, so styrofoam is one of the ones that people know the most about. It's also, let me see, it's just like a kind of general purpose plastic. I'm trying to think of something more common, but styrofoam is really the one that everybody knows.
Cool.
But I think it's the sixth most common.
Do you know what other kinds of plastics are the most commonly found? And are you specifically focusing on plastic that's in the ocean, or are you talking about plastic pollution everywhere?
So kind of, I guess it's more that I focus on plastic in the water, but it's also connected that I end up thinking a lot about plastic on land, plastic in rivers, plastic everywhere.
Cool. So very cool. So we've got a question. What are the best and cheapest substitutes for plastic?
I think the best substitute is to not use what you don't have to in the first place first. And then I guess the next step is always something recycled, something that you can reuse. But in terms of like a specific material, it really depends on the application. But yeah, the first part, the best thing is to cut out what you can. Not using plastic is obviously the superior alternative, but recycled is always best, I think.
Cool. And so this is more of like a technical question, but do you have a microphone on your headphones?
I do.
I think it's like kind of bumping into you. Do you have a microphone on your computer?
I do, but I'm not. Let's see if I can figure out how to use this.
It might be better if you unplug your headphones and just talk and see. We'll see if we have any problems with reverb, but we often don't. So we could try that out.
I think I might. Oh dear. Yeah, I think maybe I'll just take out my headphones.
Taking off your headphones might be the best thing to do. Even if you, well, yeah, let's see if that works.
Okay, this should be better.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, that sounds great. Cool. Okay. So Susan would like to know if Tetra boxes are a better alternative to plastic.
Uh, Tetra boxes, are those used for like,
I think it's like milk cartons.
there's, um, I don't really know, honestly. Um,
Because a lot of those are, I think, coated in plastic, maybe. I'm not really sure.
yeah, I think the composites are actually really tough to recycle. So, I mean, it's with all of these things, the like ultimate answer is to do like a full assessment from cradle to grave. So, how the things are produced, how their life cycle, impacts the environment and people. And I personally don't know of any uh, comparisons with the Tetra boxes and typical plastic. So I do not have a really good answer for that. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You don't have to have an answer for everything. Even if we're experts on stuff, there are squid questions that stump me every time. So
Yeah.
here's a question. So we know, okay, so you've said that sometimes bacteria degrades plastic and sometimes sun degrades plastic. And so in the ocean, just from like basic physical forces like waves and that kind of thing, plastic breaks down into little bits until we end up
Mm-hmm.
with microplastics. And so does the sun like truly get rid of it, or is it just breaking it down into smaller bits?
So, yeah, this is like a really good point because when we say degrades plastic, what does that even mean? Like, degrades, a smaller plastic degrades to nothing? No. So, photochemistry, so degradation by sunlight, creates a lot of microplastic fragments and then a lot of like dissolved compounds that we really haven't characterized yet. That is actually what my PhD focuses on. And then it also produces CO2. And while I think in the context of climate change, that kind of scares people, that's actually a great thing because, I mean, if you turned all of the plastic in the world into CO2, it would be a very tiny blip among everything that we're emitting from fossil fuel. Um, so and it also works a lot with like the microbial degradation processes and the physical like crashing of waves because sunlight weakens the plastic. So then when it's like beating against the beach, it breaks down into those smaller fragments more easily. So it's kind of a spectrum of like degradation from like the giant plastics down to the microscopic plastics down to just fully going away to CO2.
Cool. So Earth Day Network are our partners for today, and they want to know how has your research changed any of your purchasing decisions or environmental behaviors?
Um, I mean, it's really influenced me to like evaluate what I actually need in the first place. Um, just because I know that the state of the science of telling us like this product is better than this product just isn't good enough that I can feel confident buying the vast majority of things like local things that don't have to travel a long distance. I feel better about that. But in general, it just made me want to avoid the decision if I can. And then do like upcycling of clothes that I already have and stuff like that. It's made me very conscientious, I'd say.
Cool.
But at the same time, like I do what I can, but I try not to like beat myself up over it. I don't think people should beat themselves up over this.
So a lot of people kind of raise their eyebrows when environmentalists are saying, you know, we have to use reusable stuff, and which is definitely valid, but that so many people just like can't do that for
Yeah.
various reasons. And so, how do you approach these kinds of considerations when you're dealing with policy?
Yeah. So I mean, the saying that I like very much is do what you can, not what you should. And I think we should not force people to do what they can't. Policy should not impose the burden on consumers. Certainly, it should be on industry if, like, to make bags cheaper for people, or to subsidize the reusable bags for people who are on food stamps. Like, there are definitely ways for policies to work for everybody. And there's also ways to work with industry to make sure that vulnerable groups aren't targeted in ways that they shouldn't be.
Great. Jesse says, hi, I'm a teacher joining with several of my elementary school students. What inspired you to go into science, and particularly environmental science, when you were young?
That's a good question. I waffled for a really long time. I always felt like I wanted to save the world, but I switched from like pre-med to international affairs to journalism to I don't know, anything you can imagine. And I guess I feel very lucky that I converged on this, and it's still kind of a mystery to me how. I think it's a combination of just finding that this was my skill set. So science is just apparently what I'm good at somehow. But also, I think it's a very important problem that a lot of people can relate to. And yet it's also, I think, a little bit more ignored than like a lot of the medical problems in the world. And I liked that I could target something that's, I don't know, very important, maybe needs a little more awareness, and that I felt like I could do something for.
Cool. Amelia would like to know, why is plastic not biodegradable?
So one of my advisors has a really good metaphor for this. Microbes often can technically degrade plastic, but in the environment, microbes kind of have this whole huge buffet of food. And so it's like, given the choice for humans between like a nice pizza and stale bread, they're obviously going to choose the pizza. And in the environment, plastic is kind of just the stale bread. Like, the microbes have better stuff around. Why would they eat that? And so in strange circumstances, like if it's the only thing there, or if like the other food is kind of icky, microbes often can eat the plastic, but it's just usually not very favorable for them, and they'd rather just go for the abundant good stuff.
Cool. So okay, let's say hypothetically, we have a bunch of plastic in some kind of industrial place, and we toss in these microbes that are capable of eating plastic. Do we know what comes out after they eat it? Like, what are they metabolizing it? So like, what are they eating it and then excreting? Like, what's left over when they're done? Is it worse? Better?
Not entirely something that I know.
That's okay. That's okay.
I think in some cases it's CO2. Some cases it's like just the straight up, what's the word? The monomer. So like smaller pieces of the plastic.
Okay.
I'm not sure though. I don't know a whole lot about the biodegradation aspect.
Cool. Okay. No worries. Okay, so Christine asks, on the bottom of plastic products, I noticed that there are some numbers that range between 1 and 6. What do those numbers mean?
So that's just the type of the polymer. So like I mentioned polystyrene before, I think that's 6. And polyethylene, I think, is 1 and 2. And it's just telling you what kind of plastic it is. And often that's very useful in recycling, because I think certain places can recycle certain plastics while others can't. So you should pay attention to those numbers in theory. But that's it. It's nothing.
Just the type of plastic. Very cool. Jesse would like to know, could you explain what microplastic is and why it's such a big problem?
Yeah. So microplastic is like, it's basically just the small pieces of plastic that you get when bigger plastics break down in the environment. So you can have like a water bottle that gets input to the ocean from a river, and over time, like through sunlight, breaking it down through waves crashing it against rocks, it will break into tiny, tiny fragments. And then in the environment, honestly, our understanding of what happens with these fragments is not as good as we want it to be, but I think the current evidence shows that, it's not great for animals that are eating it. Often it's just like a physical thing, like it gets stuck in their stomachs, and that's just bad for them. And the other thing is, since we don't know, that's pretty concerning, right? Since we're putting just massively increasing quantities. So there's like 1 piece of plastic per cubic meter in the ocean, I think. The ocean's huge. It's insane that we've managed that. So I think that's very concerning. But in terms of specific things that we worry about with the microplastics, a lot of it's just unknown, and that's scary.
For sure. So Science Friday is tuning in today, and their events coordinator would like to know, how does plastic affect animals in the ocean? Is it consumption, getting caught on the plastic? Like, what's the biggest problem?
It's hard to know what the biggest problem is, just because we don't, at the micro level, we don't have a great understanding of what's happening. And we also don't fully understand the toxic effects of, like, beyond just like physically getting lodged in something's stomach. Is it poisoning the animal? We're not certain. We see signs that yes, in a lot of cases, at high enough concentrations, it is kind of toxic, but it's hard to extrapolate to like the whole ocean full of organisms. But on the other hand, like physical things, like things getting caught in plastic and, plastic getting caught around animals is not good. And that happens a lot, and that's very sad. Yeah, but relative to each other, it's just too soon to say.
Yeah, I read this study that was done on little coral and anemones, like these little guys, and they were fed like regular food or plastic, and they were eating the plastic more than they were eating regular food, which is bananas and awful. So it's like stuff like that. You just sometimes we can't even predict how it's affecting things, because how do we even know to ask that question? Like I think people just look at the effects.
People do really cool stuff on like how it affects animal behavior, and I think that's a fascinating field. I mean, I don't think it's at the point where we can say exactly what's happening, but it does influence animal behavior just to have that plastic around, and that's crazy.
Totally. Someone would like to know what makes a plastic either recyclable or not recyclable.
I would say a lot of it is just the system that's in place where you are. And also like the condition of the plastic itself, like if it's dirty or if it's really degraded, that stuff's not going to be very recyclable. But if it's like a plastic water bottle that you've just drank out of and it's pretty good shape, that's the stuff that we can usually recycle. But in terms of technology, most of it I would say is recyclable. It's more a matter of like cost barriers in different locations that determine whether or not we can recycle certain types of plastic.
Cool. We've got a very timely question from Turkey. I was wondering about, so right now, we're all really worried about our health, worried about cross-contaminating things, and we've seen this increase in single-use plastics. So like, how do you feel about that? And like, what do you think, is that the right thing to do? Or like, what should we do? How do we balance our like worry for other humans and like environmental concerns?
I mean, first of all, I think following the current regulations and policies in place where you are is generally the best idea. And I think it makes a lot of sense. This is kind of an exceptional context. I don't think we have time to do like enough of a cost benefit analysis to say, well, this many more people will get sick from the disposable plastics or from the reusable plastics. So I think we're doing the best we can, and it's, I mean, I do feel kind of bad when I have to get a plastic bag at the store, but at the same time, it's worth it in this case. But that said, we can't get out of the habits of using reusable things after this.
Right. Alex would like to know, how does plastic get into the ocean in the first place?
So a lot of it is just mismanaged plastic waste. So like plastic that's littered, plastic that escapes from landfills. I think something along the lines of only 10% of plastic is recycled. So that's a lot of opportunities for plastic release into the environment. And it goes through rivers. A lot of it does end up in rivers and then eventually to the ocean, but then a lot of it also stays on land. And then there are things like fishing, which directly put like nets and stuff into the ocean. And that's pretty big actually. And then accidental or maybe intentional dumping by industry. We see a lot of these like tiny pellets of plastic, which are used in like just making the initial polymers themselves. And those they're called nurdles. They spill maybe on ships during transport. But I would say the big thing that concerns me is just mismanagement of waste. That happens a lot, both in this country and in countries that have more developing waste management systems.
Cool. We had a question about nurdles in our science trivia the other night because I think the word nurdle is like too funny. But anyway, we've got a question from Abby. What recommendations do you have to promote change at a local community level to raise awareness?
So I'd say the first step is just leading by example. You don't have to like drive yourself crazy trying to be perfect, but like, having good habits and trying to get your friends to bring their reusable shopping bags or whatever, and having like clothing swaps for clothes that you don't like instead of just buying more, for example. So that's the first level. But then I think the next step up is getting involved. So like going to community meetings and advocating improvements to the recycling system or organizing walk to school days, stuff like that, where you go beyond just the personal and actually spread that to other people and, you know, help educate, help involve. And I think that can be very empowering, both personally and to others who might not have quite the awareness. And that's, I think, the ultimate goal from what individuals can do.
So a lot of times you have criticisms of individual action only being able to get us so far. So what policies do you think we should advocate for? Like, are there bills that are coming up in states or federally?
That's a great question. Honestly, I think a lot of policies should be putting more of a burden onto industry just to keep track of their plastic. So like we shouldn't have to worry this much about whether our recycling systems are working. The industry should be taking it back. And I mean, they can use it. It's actually kind of crazy. Like that does represent a pretty valuable feedstock. The plastic is somewhat difficult to transform back into a usable product, but it's not that difficult. And our technology is getting better. So I think in general, just trying to close this loop is something that policy should really be striving for.
Awesome. What do you think about incinerating plastics at high temperatures for the cheaper plastic products and deriving some energy from them? So that's what some folks do. What is your professional opinion on that?
So I think it depends. I think the ultimate goal is to recycle the plastic into like a useful product. But if the option is it going into the environment and it being incinerated, as long as the like byproducts from incineration are being captured and handled properly, I'm pretty okay with that, especially if the heat is being used for some sort of other purpose. But there are some caveats to that. Like if they're just emitting the byproducts from the plastic burning, that's a no. I think that's trouble. So yeah, I would say maybe yes, that's a good solution.
Cool. Elliot would like to know, are there any ocean cleanup strategies that show promise or specific NGOs that are effective at getting plastic out of the ocean?
So in general, I think ocean cleanup is tricky. I appreciate the awareness it raises and I appreciate the effort, but I think in a lot of cases it's tough just because plastic is like very dispersed. Like I said, maybe one microscopic piece of plastic per cubic meter of seawater. So it's really tough to get out, especially because even like with the most cutting edge equipment, we're still not great at actually figuring out what is plastic and what is like plankton or like other marine products. So I think we have to be really careful with the cleanup stuff. And I think the first goal we should have is to stop emitting it in the first place. And I'm more happy when I see efforts towards that. Just because if we clean all the plastic up in the ocean and then keep emitting it, we're just going to have to clean it up again, and that's not ideal.
Right. So Tracy would like to know, what from your research or fieldwork gives you the most hope?
I think what gives me the most hope is actually how well we've been able to work with industry. Because I think it's a common misconception that even I had, that things that are good for the environment are bad for industry, but from our collaborations, that is clearly not the case. I think a lot of these companies are well aware that plastic pollution looks absolutely terrible for them, and they're actually pretty eager to work with us because it's good for their image if they're working with the scientists who are trying to make plastic pollution less of a problem. But then also, as I said before, they're interested in being able to recycle plastic because it's a good feedstock for them. So I found that very heartening because, I don't know, in a lot of environmental problems, it feels like industry is just this huge monumental enemy that like we small people cannot possibly fight against, but that's not the case here.
Cool. Devin would like to know, do you have any advice for young people interested in pursuing environmental science?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, just get involved in like anything and everything. Um, Research is a lot of fun to get involved in, but it doesn't have to be research. It can be like public outreach things. Like citizen science is getting more and more common, where you can go help like collect samples for a scientific study. And it's just a very cool introduction to how the research process works. And also just talking to people. I was like a very confused undergrad, and I think the most clarity I got was from talking to like just like everybody who would agree to meet with me, and asking them absurd basic questions about environmental science and public health and anything I wanted to know. And I mean, people are very receptive and very nice and good at kind of pointing you in the right direction and helping you target what your skills are most suited for.
Awesome. Gina would like to know, is it true that when plastics break down into microplastics in the ocean, they're consumed by humans when we eat seafood?
Sometimes. I do think a lot of animals in the environment, including the ones that we eat, unfortunately, are found to have small amounts of plastic, even in the parts of them that we eat. But um, it's usually not huge. And honestly, it's hard to say how common it is. I think the difference between like farmed fish and wild caught fish is different. I think if I recall correctly, the farmed fish are better in that regard, although I would not say they're better in all regards. It's kind of a pick your poison thing, unfortunately. But I don't know too much, unfortunately.
Cool. So Teresa would like to know, a lot of the alternatives for plastic end up being the type of thing that we have to compost, but they're only compostable in industrial compost
Mhm.
facilities. So how can a regular person access compost facilities, and what do we do about that?
I'm not entirely sure how you can access the compost facilities. I think in a lot of cases, like at my institution, we have compostable plastic cups, but you can only actually get them composted if you discard them in the place where they're sold. Um, in general, this is kind of why I advocate for reusable absolutely as much as possible, just because the composting situation is great when it works, but if you accidentally put your compostable cup in just the normal recycling, not going to work the same, and it's tough to keep track of.
Cool. Paula would like to know, how can people help with projects to clean up the oceans, and what are ways that lead to them?
I mean, I think it depends partially on where you live, of course. I think in my local community, it's very easy for people to get involved because there's just the science institution constantly organizing outreach and beach cleanups and stuff like that. So if you are somewhere near any sort of marine research facility or anything like that, that's something to keep an eye out for. Otherwise, I think even just Googling it, I have found a lot of research or outreach. Um, from a monetary perspective, was always donating, reaching out to local groups. It's pretty much the world is your oyster in this regard. It depends on what kind of involvement you want and how deep. But if you have things that you want to help with, I think it's a matter of finding the right people and asking.
Yeah, and you can also just do stuff yourself. Like if you
Yes.
have a group of friends and you're near a river, just do a river cleanup by yourself. There's nothing stopping you from doing that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to take initiative and do the thing yourself. You don't need someone to tell you what to do.
Yeah. The trash tag was pretty good.
Yeah. Liam would like to know, how much plastic have you personally found in the ocean?
So I actually most of my research is in the lab. So I've never been on a research vessel, but I guess mostly I see my plastic walking along the beach, and it's a lot of water bottles, which is sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not much of a field worker though.
Can you speak at all about landfills and in general?
In general,
Well, someone asked, what can we do about landfills?
what can we do? So this is where the reduce comes in. Landfills are probably not going to get better in the near future, but we can make them better if we just reduce and reuse. And it's hard for sure. It's more of a philosophical thing than a science thing at this point. Although some countries do incinerate what would normally go into a landfill. And again, this is the kind of thing where I have that caveat of like if they're capturing what they incinerate and disposing of it cleanly, that's awesome. Especially if they're using that energy for something useful. But I don't think landfills here are going anywhere anytime soon. And the best we can do is to just reduce.
Mm-hmm. When I was doing field work, we were finding like, when you're talking about incinerating, we were finding like burnt blobs of plastic all together,
Yeah.
like chunky, burnt, it was It was a mess.
Yeah, that's why it really needs to be done properly. Like I know Scandinavia, I lived in Stockholm for a little bit and they incinerate all of their waste like right there in the city. And I never knew because they're not like emitting it. It's actually being used properly, but I don't know. It's not
It
always.
takes a lot of infrastructure to do properly, which is not
Yes, exactly.
trivial at all.
Yeah.
Tiffany asks, she's age 10, why is Earth Day chosen to be so late in the year when plastics are becoming biodegradable and harder to clean up?
I don't know.
Well,
Um,
let's reframe the question. Like how can we bring like the spirit of Earth Day into the whole year?
so this is kind of where I like to say the like lead by example bit is important because I mean, I try not to be too annoying. Maybe I am annoying, but I try to like encourage my friends to do like craft afternoons where we upcycle our clothes into like a carpet or something. Like I'm making a carpet out of my old jeans right now. So making it fun and making it something people actively want to do, I think is a really good thing to do. And it's not that hard if you just feel like being creative. Also, the internet is full of ideas.
That's totally true. Um, Someone would like to know, what's the good side of plastic? What's like the positive, what can we see a silver lining here?
I mean, first of all, we absolutely need it. There's no getting around that. Plastic has been just hugely instrumental in tons of medical breakthroughs and our ability to like live comfortably and function as a society. I don't think we inherently have to make it so bad. I think it's a matter of just using it responsibly, and thus far we haven't. But it doesn't mean we can't. It just means we need to figure out the technology and the social norms to actually get back on track into a sustainable use. Um,
Hannah would like to know, what makes you love research?
I love it for so many reasons. First of all, the people who do the research I'm in, or people in my research field, are just like incredibly passionate, brilliant people who are devoting their life to like improving the world, and that's super empowering and exciting to be around. I also love that I can, like, the world's my oyster. I can think about a problem and then I can actually like do work that helps target like solutions to that, and that's awesome. You also never really have a boring day. I feel like it's a lot of different work. Like some days I'm writing, some days I'm analyzing on the computer, some days I'm in the lab setting up experiments, and then some days maybe I'll be in the field. And it's just a very exciting, wonderful place to be.
Awesome. Aiden would like to know, what happens after we put plastic in the recycling bin?
Depends on where you are, unfortunately. I'd say that in some places it really does go to recycling. And when it's recycled, I think first it's sorted. I think there are a few methods for doing that. And then um, past that step, there are also a few methods for recycling it. And I know some companies will take that recycled plastic and make like recycled bags out of it, or, you know, a wide variety of things. Unfortunately, in most cases nowadays, it just goes to the landfill, and that's why I try to urge people to maybe get involved in their communities and like go to community meetings, advocate for a better recycling system, show that like people in the community really do care about that, because that's important.
For sure. Lily would like to know, did your work get political? And do you have an opinion of the Green New Deal?
So we try to stay out of politics, but at the same time, like, evidence-based policy is critical. And so, yeah, I do my best not to like comment on specific policies, but I can say that like policies that follow the science, that show like a care about recycling plastic or minimizing its environmental impact, those are the ones that I will always support. And that's not, I don't think that's political bias. I think that's just being a good scientist and supporting, you know, practicing what I preach.
Awesome. Linda would like to know, which companies are on board with your philosophy of reducing and redesigning their products? Are these generally toy companies or clothing companies or technology? What do you generally find
So
about that?
we mostly work directly with the like companies who produce just the raw polymers. So those are not the companies like Patagonia that you hear about. They're like big chemical companies and oil companies and those kinds of things. And obviously we don't work directly with them most of the time, but there are tons of companies like Patagonia that implement pretty awesome science in recycling plastic in their products and stuff like that. But mostly it's the ones that you don't hear about. It's like those monolithic giant chemical companies.
Cool. Let's see. Sorry, we have a bunch of repeat questions in here. How do you know if a water bottle is single use or reusable?
Well, most of the reusable ones are the ones that like are not, wait, did I say most? Okay, yeah, most of the reusable ones are not flimsy. You will actually want to use them again. Whereas like the ones you buy in the grocery store and those packs of like, I don't know, 20, those ones that you can like squeeze and twist. Anything that kind of breaks down easily is not something you really want to be reusing. Although if you're forced to buy a disposable water bottle and you feel like reusing it a couple times, great. But it's mostly those like sturdy ones.
Yeah, I think the non-reusable ones that are plastic, I think they are more prone to, growing bacteria on them than the like ones that are made to be reused. And so it's a lot easier to clean the reusable ones. So generally speaking, you have to be careful about reusing water bottles that weren't made to be reused. But I'm not saying I've never not reused a non-reusable water bottle, been there. But anyway, so Brody would like to know, how do you think we should break up the big blob of plastic in the ocean? So I'm assuming that's talking about the giant Pacific Ocean patch. And do we even like try, or like, are we just going to do more damage in the process?
So I'm so glad somebody brought this up, because I think this is one of the craziest disconnects between like what science says and then what the media interprets it to be. So there is kind of a Great Pacific Garbage Patch in that there's a part of the Pacific Ocean where all of the plastic, or a lot of the plastic, accumulates, but it's not like it's a floating island of plastic. I know of several researchers who go out to sea and take plastic samples, and when they're in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, they don't see plastic. They might see a little bit more floating trash than usual, which is always very surprising when you're in the middle of the South Pacific. That's like a very odd place to see litter. But it's not something that we can just like grab and move. It's like plastic that's in the water. It's still on the order of 1 microscopic piece of plastic per cubic meter. It's just on the higher end of that. So it's the same as any other ocean cleanup at that point. We just don't have the technology to detect the plastic and to sort it out efficiently without harming the ecosystems that are there and expending tons of energy.
Cool. What is your favorite part of your job and your least favorite part of your job?
I think my favorite part of my job is just the people I get to work with and talk to every day, because they are brilliant and wonderful and always inspiring me to think of ideas that I just never could have imagined in the first place. My least favorite part? I don't know. I guess sometimes it cuts into my life a little bit more than I would like, but I don't mind that necessarily. I mostly mind it when I'm in the lab at like 3 a.m. taking samples out of the piece of equipment it's in. But honestly, I find that kind of exciting in its own weird way. And that's
cool. So I have a question from my experience as a Hawaiian and a scientist that works in Hawaii. I always find, like, okay, when you're like shopping for clothes and you see the little like ring of plastic that says what size it is, like the medium, the ML. Okay, so I'll find bits of plastic that are shaped like that, but a little bit bigger and made of like much tougher plastic, like these little chunks. And there are so many of them. It's wild. And I just do you have any idea what those things are from?
Are they zip ties? Zip ties, I think, are
not zip ties. So they're like, yeah, they're round and they're made of this like incredibly hard plastic. And some of them are like this long. And then some of them are like this long, but all circular.
I would guess that that's something like more industrial or construction related.
Yeah, I also assume it's industrial, but I have no idea. Anyway, I was just curious if you knew, because I couldn't believe how many of them there were, like all different levels of degradation, colors, etc. But okay.
A lot of really cool plastic research comes out of Hawaii because it gets a lot of the plastic. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I run this research trip to Hawaii usually twice a year. This year it's not happening because coronavirus. But one day we go to this beach that's like stunningly beautiful, but covered in plastic. And so we spend
Yeah.
like 2 hours just picking up all the plastic. And it's like, we know it's just a drop in the bucket, but it's
Hey, it's
so,
worth a try.
yeah, I mean, it's just heartbreaking to be in such a gorgeous place. Like, you've
Mm-hmm.
got a mountain over here, you've got the beach over here. It's like I can't
Yeah.
handle how beautiful it is, and then it's just covered in
Yeah.
multicolored human disaster. Anyway, just
Especially because much of that it's not from Hawaii. It's from
no,
like
yeah, it's from somewhere else.
like that's just washing up on Hawaii's beaches. It's very sad.
Yeah, Hawaii generally, or Oahu, where we do the field work, is generally super plastic aware.
That's good.
Yeah, which is a shame because how could you not be? Anyway, we're now at 11:40, so we tried to wrap it up within 45 minutes. So we always ask everybody the same 2 questions at the end. The first is, what is something that you wish that everybody knew related to your work? And then what is something that you wish everybody knew about literally anything in the world?
Oh, I think related to my work, I one of the things that gets to me the most is just how much misinformation is out there about, I mean, all science, and it's very timely right now to be talking about misinformation in science and just the media having disconnects with what the science is actually saying. So I would always be conscientious of like what sources you're reading and try and find primary sources. So like you don't necessarily have to go back and read scientific articles. That's a pain if you're not like fully acquainted with the field and the terminology, but try and pick like reliable sources. So I usually say like look for NPR or New York Times or BBC, because while they often don't get it absolutely perfect, they at least are a little bit more reputable. And I know that in our experience, they have like worked with us to make sure that they're putting out reporting that accurately represents what our research is saying. So just pay a lot of attention to your information. And then something that I want everybody to know about anything.
It can be as stupid or profound, doesn't matter.
I mean, I guess on this topic, I think everybody should know that like there's no person too small or issue too small to try. I think I was like in high school, I was like, no, there's no way I could ever be a scientist. There's no way I could ever help the world like as much as I want. But now I'm here, and it's kind of crazy. And I don't think there's anything special about me that made that happen. I think it's just trying, and I think anybody can do that.
Awesome. Always try it, Steph. I'm totally behind that. Awesome. So thank you for joining us. And Tammy, thank you so much for joining us today. We want to give a big shout out to the Columbia Regional Program interpreters who help out the Portland Public Schools. They have been coming in clutch for helping us with all of these sessions, especially today when we have 4. So as always, Skype a Scientist is a nonprofit, and we are totally donor supported. And the only way that we can produce all of this programming is by getting donor support. So we're a very small program, and we're not like well funded. So if you could help us, that would be awesome. Go to patreon.com/Skype-a-Scientist or paypal.me/Skype-a-Scientist. We are 15 minutes away from our next session, which is going to be all about climate change. So join us back here. You can find the link on our website or on Twitter. So our Twitter is @SkypeScientist. Our website is skypeascientist.com. We will see you back here in 17 minutes and counting. Thank you again, Anna and Tammy, for being with us. Goodbye.